Welcome to another episode on My Health Renewed podcast. Today's topic is about cancer. This is a sensitive topic for me. I lost one of my best friends to cancer, and then my aunt has been struggling with cancer, and my mom recently was diagnosed. And it's just so many people around us have been struck with this. We don't even like to say the word, we'll say the C word. So I thought I would bring Dr. Vrzal back on. You recognize his name because he was in one of our past podcasts speaking about headaches. Well, he has a lot to say about cancer, so I'm excited to have him on. He will be going into depth on what the thyroid, liver, and cortisol have to do with cancer. So I pray that this podcast is a blessing to you. Please share this with all your friends and family. So real quick, I'm going to reintroduce him if you didn't listen to our first podcast. He's a chiropractor. He's also certified in applied kinesiology, sacro-occupational techniques, biochemistry, a Toastmaster. He does seminars on thyroid, autoimmune. He's been in this industry for over 20 years, and he is just a book of knowledge. I hope you really enjoy listening to him. But first, before we get started, we need to give the disclaimer. My Health Renewed podcast is intended for general educational purposes only and not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental, or nutritional advice from a physician, therapist, mental health practitioner, dietitian, nutritionist, or any other healthcare or wellness professional. Do not disregard or delay taking or seeking any medical advice or any medication or other professional advice based on the information contained here in My Health Renewed podcast. If you have a medical condition, please consult your physician or health professional before undertaking or changing any physical activity. There's our disclaimer. Let's carry on. I'm so glad to have you on here, Dr. Vrzal.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dr.
Back again.
Guys, if you haven't heard his first podcast, you got to go back and listen to it. In fact, I actually bought the book, The Headache Advantage.
Nice.
Yeah, I've read it. I thought it was so great. Oh, you've got it on you right now. It's one of those things where you read it and then you're like, I'm going to reread this and use this as a reference.
Wow, awesome.
Absolutely love that book. It's very educating. So keep writing books.
Thank you for that. Yes, right. There's plenty more in here.
One more assignment. Just give me one more assignment, Miss Kristi. Like, here
Yes.
you go, writing books. But I would actually like to start off with just the understanding on what is cancer.
Basically, we're always making cancer cells, unfortunately. Cells are often mutating. They're not being regenerated in a healthy, proficient way. And there's a pathway in the liver called methylation that activates tumor suppressor genes. Those are genes that will help suppress, fight off, and get rid of those bad cells. Cancer happens when those bad cells outperform our ability to break them down. So there's a couple key pathways in the liver that we're going to be talking a lot about today. One is called P450. It's the first phase of detoxification in the liver. So that's the first phase in detoxification that makes toxins water soluble, so that then the second set of pathways then will break down those now water soluble toxins and get them ready to get rid of. And so malignant cancers are where it's pandemics, I already used that word, when there's cells all over the body. And it's not just a thyroid or just a pancreas or something that has tumor cells. When it's all over the body, that typically means that first phase of detoxification, that P450 pathway, has run amok, and these other phase 2 pathways are not breaking those toxins down properly after the hydroxylation. That first phase has been going crazy. So often that's a virus that will trigger that pathway to go crazy because it is an immune pathway. The body needs to hydroxylate those viruses and the bacteria and things like that. And so if there's a virus in the body somewhere that the body's fighting, that upregulates that P450 pathway. Now, very volatile toxins don't go through phase 2 detoxification, then we have big name problems. And so for me as a clinician, that means I go directly to that pathway when somebody says, Grandma had liver cancer, now it's all over her body. That typically tells me that there's a virus somewhere upregulating that P450, that phase 1 pathway, P450, and causing the body to run amok like that. So that's one aspect or one type of, I basically look at cancer in those 2 different pathways, either this malignancy sort of pattern where cells all over the body are mutating, or all different types of cells are mutating, or a more benign type of a cancer where it's an encapsulated, it's a region, it's not all over the body. If there was good news in cancer, that's good news, right?
Yeah.
It's just an area that medical doctors can cut out or kill or that sort of thing. Those are benign cancers. That typically is very specifically just the methylation pathway. So that's that where we talked about upregulating methylation activates those tumor suppressor genes. And so if that pathway is not functioning properly, that typically will cause cells in a localized area to mutate or to be compromised. And so then we want to look at, rebuilding, regenerating, healing that specific area to heal it up and slow that process down. Typically, methylation gets compromised by stress. I mean, how many times do you see, somebody and we've got a couple of really good stories potentially to share with you on how stress just unfortunately opens the door wide open to cancers because cortisol can inhibit that methylation pathway, the stress hormone. The other thing that typically does that is toxins, toxic metals. So think, the Aaron Brockovich sort of scenario where, I don't know if you remember that movie 10, 15 years ago where Aaron Brockovich lived in a downstream from a factory, a manufacturing facility that was pouring toxins into the water, and those toxins gave her cancer, gave the whole community cancer. And now we're surrounded by, that's a story that got publicized and was made a best-selling movie. But we're around that every day. Think glyphosate, for example, pesticide, the Roundup that's used on all of our wheat, corn, soy, and oats that's inhibiting that methylation pathway. And then we start losing the ability to facilitate the killing of cancer, if you will. So it's that harmony. We need to limit the amount of toxins and things that we're exposed to that compromise our ability to fight these monsters, and we need to limit the exposure to them. Toxins will set up more benign type of cancers, viruses, stealthy viruses, typically in the kind of the cold flu sort of genre, or some of the STDs or things like that. Well, think HPV, human papillovirus, that so many gals and is injected. Unfortunately, I had one of those just yesterday. Fortunately, it was a young girl. It was not a cancer situation, but in her case, and I'm going to get us, taken off the air, but in her case, it was that had triggered some unfortunate pathways. Again, this was not a cancer case, but that's the type of thing that it could have been 10 years from now that this is really a bad deal. Praise God. We caught it she was 13 years old. And we were able to help. And she came to me because she was told she had an autoimmune condition. They were going to give her methotrexate and drugs and things to suppress the immune system because she had back pain. It was kind of crazy. And then as I dug in, it was that pathway we were just talking about where the P450 pathway was running amok. And it was the virus that had stimulated that to run amok and really caused her body to attack itself.
Got you. How do you test the P450?
P450 is cytochrome P450. It's a group of pathways, but that's kind of the most common, most popular one in there. And so it's a reflex. It's an acupuncture point right on the side of the rib cage. If you put your right elbow, the elbow crease right to the side of the body, there's a point that may potentially be tender there. If a person's a muscle tester, that point will be weak. Basically, it'll cause a conditional weakness of any muscle in the body. When you touch that, that tells me that pathway is dysfunctional. There's ways that I muscle test to see whether it's hyper, or in other words, gone overactive or underactive. If it's simply underactive, that's better news. That's more symptomatic. That's more like chemical sensitivity. That's, you sneeze around perfumes and things like that. That's a low functioning P450. That's, again, in the big scheme of things, that just typically means we need more antioxidants. We need to help feed the body with things like vitamin A, vitamin C, zinc. Copper is also partially helpful. Manganese, those are minerals to help facilitate that pathway. Those are minerals and vitamins that you might consider, antioxidants you might consider if you're chemically sensitive. Again, the good news is that's not likely going to create a malignant type of a problem, but that's more of an annoyance, if you will, and poor detoxification when it's underactive. When it's overactive, we need to find the virus. We need to strengthen the gland or organ that is compromised, creating the opportunity for that virus to flourish, whether that's uterus or pancreas or thyroid or spleen, these areas that often are compromised and create an environment where a virus can flourish.
Interesting. So would you say some people get cancer then after they've been exposed? For instance, this is just a question, but my mom got sick. We all got the flu. And then it wasn't long after that she suddenly had cancer. Is that a common thing?
Yes, unfortunately it is. And typically, and COVID is a great example of this. COVID's slightly different because it's a retrovirus that it'll deactivate methylation as a retrovirus. Again, tumor suppressor genes, right? That we lose the ability to fight. So yes, cancer was already prolific. It's even more prolific since COVID, unfortunately. For the type of cancer she had, I think you said it was in several different types of tissue.
Actually, I think I told you that one. Hers was endometrium. And so she just had the hysterectomy. The whole hysterectomy is what she did.
Endometrial tissue.
But I thought if you take out the adrenals, is that going to mess up her hormones? Or is it not so much going to be bad on her when she's already past menopause?
Right. So the couple good discussions in those two questions. So endometrial tissue typically, is uterus, that's girl tissue. She probably had a weakness in there, and that's where that virus unfortunately would settle and run amok. Early on in my muscle testing, as I got better and better at it, I realized that viruses, most bugs, viruses, bacteria, spirochetes, yeast, they tend to be opportunists, right? They tend to culminate in the weak gland or organ. Early on, it's, take this vitamin A, vitamin C, all these things to help fight a virus. Whereas then I realized that if I strengthen the weak tissue where that virus showed up, if you will, then we got much better results. So like homeless that take over an uninhabited building because it's available, viruses will they'll proliferate if the intestine is weak, or if there's a gland in the area like the lung or the uterine tissue that is weak and compromised. So we don't want to have weaknesses, right? Be Superman, be Wonder Woman.
I like it. I want to be Wonder Woman. I want to be Superwoman and Wonder. Yeah. So a lot of people will mention that viruses they're now discovering are parasites. Do you have any thoughts on that by chance?
Yeah, the mechanism there is parasites polarize the immune system to where it loses its ability to prevent and fight viruses. There's this Th1, Th2 balance, harmony that needs to take place in the immune system. Parasites polarize where that Th1 pathway becomes weaker or deficient. We don't have as much opportunity and as much ability to fight a virus. And so that's where things that, currently you probably talk about that because the antiparasitic, some of the old school antiparasitic drugs are being hailed as anti-cancer and anti-COVID during all that. That's part of how those would work, is if we had parasites, then we're going to be much more weak, much more vulnerable to viruses, which could then upregulate and set the stage for cancers. I did have a patient years ago that a young preteen girl that had a tumor, had a mass in her cerebellum in the back of her head. And her aunt actually was a natural practitioner like me, and said, the neurosurgeon said, we need to cut this mass out of the back of your daughter's brain. And the aunt says it's a parasite. Don't cut it open. And they said, we're submitting your kid to Child Protective Services because she has to have this surgery. You don't have a choice. And so sure, they opened the back of her skull and pulled out a mass of these big black parasites that had grown in her skull, in her brain. So, fortunately, the end was good. They got those out, and it stunted her growth a little bit, but she survived and was able to move on and get her driver's license and be a good, normal, functioning human being. But that's an example of how, yes, parasites can be the trigger, but most of the time, it's the parasites opening the door for these other infections, viruses, to flourish.
Gotcha. So let me see if I got this right. I could be wrong, but a methylation problem or a virus.
Yes.
Are there any other things that it could possibly be that usually you look at too, or is it usually one or the other?
For the most part, it's one of those two pathways. And then the fun part, if you will, from a clinician perspective, is figuring out what is causing those pathways to not function properly. So that's the excitement.
That's from a doctor's perspective. That's going to be fun. Let's figure it out. It's like doing a puzzle.
Solving puzzles all day long, right?
So what kind of pieces do you find you put together sometimes with those?
Right. So, kind of like when I'm talking to people that had COVID, for example, it's what were your symptoms? So then I can understand what their weak link was going into it, because that's what long haulers, just to kind of parallel that with the cancer conundrum, is what was the weak link going into their exposure, their weakness to COVID and so on. And so if they had chronic cough and waking up between 3 and 5 in the morning, the lung does a lot of its oxygenation, a lot of its work between 3 and 5 in the morning. So if they have symptoms, chronic long-term, long hauler type symptoms ever since that exposure that are lung related, then I know right away, hey, we need to rebuild those lungs, get that taken care of, and then we're out of the mire. We're not compromised anymore. If they've had chronic fatigue, and you mentioned the adrenals, if they're struggling to get out of bed now and just haven't had the mojo since COVID, I'm looking at adrenals. Or if they have a facial rash, like a lupus kind of rash, I know adrenals have been compromised from that virus. Mm-hmm. So I try to put those types of symptoms together to know where to direct our energy, where to direct our focus as far as getting the best results for a person.
Gotcha. Now, if it was a methylation, you'd notice that doing a lot more antioxidants is helping with that process. What would be your top highest antioxidants that you find work well with people? So
the antioxidants help facilitate, and the free radical scavengers, which are kind of within the antioxidant category, is superoxide dismutase or catalase. Those are nutrients that drive the facilitate the P450 pathway, the first phase of detoxification. Then the second phase, one of the key pathways there is methylation. A lot of people hear about that have done gene testing because very common. There's, that MTHFR gene. Oh, I have the MTHFR gene. I don't detoxify properly. Ultimately, what that means supplementally is they should not be taking a folic acid supplement, which is, we'll just call it a cheaper, less well metabolized form of folate. They will need to take a folate-based supplement, like a prenatal that I helped formulate that is in the Headache Advantage line of supplements that has a very good active form of folate so that that pathway can work well, because when methylation doesn't work well, that's what sets up bad genes to be present in the baby, in the infant. So again, we want that methylation pathway to work well to have healthy children. When methylation is compromised, our bad genes are more likely to come out with our offspring. So back to your question, the methylation pathway is folate dependent, it's B12 dependent, it's methionine dependent. So it's very dependent on having the appropriate amounts of those nutrients available. And so if we're deficient in any of those, then we can have an under methylation problem. The other things that tend to inhibit it is stress. That's the cortisol problem, right? And stress or toxic metals. So that's where I was talking about, toxic metals and pesticides are a very common source of toxic metals, air pollution, and all these different things that we can get exposed to that can inhibit that methylation pathway. So we may need to just simply upregulate that by taking an appropriate folate supplement or taking B12. There's been new research that has come out that shows that the lactobacillus organisms in the gut, the intestinal good probiotic, that actually produces B12 for us. So B12 is something that we should be able to make when our digestion is working properly. So you can kind of see how my little pea brain starts putting all these cycles together.
Right.
Is it a deficiency of the good flora that's causing a person not to make appropriate B12? Other symptoms that would go along with a deficiency of B12 is lack of flexibility, because B12 also helps the fascia around the muscles be flexible and pliable so that then we can touch our toes with our knees straight and that sort of thing.
Do you have your clients see if they can stretch out, or is that kind of like one of the tests?
Yeah, I'll demonstrate it. If we're trying to help inspire them to make change, I'm going to demonstrate how these things are affecting them so that they know it's not just Dr. V told me to take this pill or Dr. V told me to eat these vegetables. It's like, this is why you need to eat these vegetables, and try to make a point, give them a little knock upside the head, this is why you need to do this or make this change. So other symptoms, we talked about the flexibility. B12 also helps convert serotonin to melatonin. So sleep, we think of B12 as an energy producing, helps the mitochondria, helps us make energy, but it also helps us get deep restful sleep. It helps us convert the stimulatory brain chemicals to the melatonin to help heal and cleanse the brain while we sleep. So that might be another sign, if they're not sleeping well, that maybe they need B12. Or so fascia, allergies. B12 also functions kind of as an antihistamine, if you will, helps us break down histamine from a overzealous immune reaction. So these are all symptoms that we might want to put together. And I kind of laid out in the book based on location of headache. And incidentally, let's back up to that just to kind of tie it back to the book a little bit. The reason the book was called The Headache Advantage is, for me, the advantage of head pain is it tells where a person's weakness is. So kind of I was talking about consultation. If I'm talking to somebody after they'd had COVID, for example, trying to figure out where their weak link was, the headache also almost tells me from a priority perspective where a person's weakest link is. So we have those 7 patterns of head pain. They may have a whole list of 10, 15, 20 symptoms, but the location of the head pain tells me what their primary weakness is. In other words, where to direct our energy to get the biggest return on our investment.
I like that. And so cortisol usually goes up from stress, or are there other things that you would say are big?
So yes, to do your 30,000 foot view, there is stress is physical, chemical, or emotional, right? So yes, the emotional stress of, oh, mom's going in for surgery. How's it going to go? What's going on there? That's emotional stress. Life, we all deal with it. We need to have bandwidth. We need to have margin in our lives so that when that stress happens, it's not the final straw that lays us out, right? So that's where our Sabbath day, that's why God even rested on the 7th day.
Yeah, he did.
So, man, if God needs to rest on the 7th day.
You're speaking to a Seventh-day Adventist, actually.
Okay, see?
I know about resting on the 7th day.
That's it. Living in the blue zones, right?
That's great.
So we do, again, just kind of making the joking point, but if God needs to rest on the 7th day, we certainly do too. Yeah, certainly a lot less strong than he is. So rest, balance in our lives so that we have that margin for when inevitable stress happens, we have margin to handle it. So that's modulation of the emotional aspect of stress. We are going to make that emotional aspect of stress worse if we're doing silly things like eating too much sugar, eating too much carbohydrate. These are exposed to chemicals. These are chemicals, toxins are a form of chemical stress. Ultimately, corn is a big surprise often. I mean, just a throwback food thing.
I've been
Corn
telling
actually,
people, stop doing corn. And they're like, why? I think my
right.
doctor told me it doesn't affect me. Yes,
Little
go
did
into
you
that,
know.
please go into that for me, please.
Thanks. Corn is the most common trigger for ovarian cysts. It will cause insulin insensitivity. It causes cortisol to rise. Unfortunately, most corn, at least 80% of the corn in the US is genetically modified so that it can absorb more of that glyphosate, more toxic metal from Roundup. I mean, when we were kids, we'd peel the corn and there'd be worms in the corn, but not anymore because they've basically grown pesticides into the kernels. So corn is genetically modified. One of my patients years ago was on the team that genetically modified it. And he's like, oh, it's all modified to do that. I mean, as a substance, even if it was organic in another third world country that wasn't genetically modified that way, it tends to, in my experience, cause cortisol to go up, or the stress hormone. And in America, it's even worse because of the modification of the corn and the Roundup that is used to kill the crop right before they harvest and so on. So
what about on the cob? Is that different than doing corn chips?
Yes, it's still a problem. Yeah, it's also profoundly common as a binder even in supplements sometimes. So yeah, corn syrup certainly is the worst of those. The high HFC, as whatever, high fructose corn syrup is certainly the worst of the tribe there, to use an Indian term for corn, right? Worst of the tribe.
Worst of the tribe.
Gotta throw some dad jokes in one way or another. Yeah, corn will cause cortisol to go up, unfortunately. It cause insulin dumping. So after a person eats even corn on the cob, to a slightly lesser degree when it's corn on the cob as opposed to chips where it's processed and fried, adulterated even more so. But look for the carb sugar cravings that would take place after consuming it. That's your sign that, oops, I had a cortisol insulin dump after consuming that. And then your brain's needing fuel. So it's going to tell you to go eat some carb, blow your diet, and have cravings.
Yeah. Crazy. So let's discuss the thyroid. How does that come into play?
Yeah, so it's a massive subject to kind of keep it to the cancer realm. As I was putting together my 12-hour thyroid seminar many years ago, I kept hearing this. Researchers were quoting this research project where they found a 200% increase in breast cancer with people, with typically gals. Well, the common thread for all of them was the thyroid medication. So as I ultimately figured out, and I'll share an unfortunate story with this as well, but as I went to try to find the article, went to the college that had published it. It looks like it has been squashed. The paper, I'm sure Mr. Synthroid didn't like that information out in the public realm. So as I tested it out and looked at what the mechanism was there, it turns out that part of the process as the thyroid functions is it activates folate. So we talked about how folate is the main nutrient to drive that methylation pathway. So if a person's on the synthetic thyroid manipulation like that, tends to cause an underfunctioning of that methylation pathway. And so unfortunately, that's what opens the door to cancers and so on. Again, kind of an unfortunate, sad story on this one was, as I was putting this information together, a gal came in with breast cancer and her tumor markers were, in the multiple thousands, almost 5 digits, when the number was supposed to be in less than 100. And in talking to her and testing it out, her pharmaceutical thyroid medication was compromising methylation. So I tested it out. I'm like, hey, this is the mechanism, unfortunately. Easy enough. Let's look at ways to potentially support your thyroid without the synthetic help. So we did. I put her on some vitamins, things like the supplement that had tyrosine, had bladderwrack, which is an iodine support source. This single supplement had these things to help her thyroid function better. Tyrosine, iodine are the key nutrients to make the thyroid hormone. Folate, again, works in there. That activates thyroid hormones. So it's such a big subject. Sorry. Remind me to get back to the thyroid headaches after this story. So as the thyroid's functioning, it's activating the folate to then facilitate methylation. In her case, the medication was inhibiting that process. So we did nutritional support for her thyroid, reduced and ultimately had her off of her thyroid medication. She was feeling good, doing well. Unfortunately, she had the most profound amount of stress in her life. She was a pastor's wife that had unfortunately fallen from grace, and it was a very public thing. And there was family involved. So she ended up basically with nobody even to consult with her. She had no tribe, no community. So her stress levels were just through the roof, unfortunately, with all of that. So again, stress, cortisol, that also further inhibits that methylation pathway we're talking about.
Right.
I mean, that's just a piece of her story. It was one of the most stressful kind of situations that she was, or composite of situations we had to deal with for people. Now, she had all that going on, and we got her off her medication. Her cancer tumor markers went down to less than half of normal, was virtually going away about 2 months into the process. We had great numbers and multiple tests demonstrating the positive change. Her energy dipped a little bit. She panicked, went back on her thyroid medication, and boom, those numbers went back up, into the multiple thousands. And unfortunately, again, with all the stress and the other stuff going on in her life, it didn't end up ending well. But we had 2 or 3 times where she went on and off of her medication, and there were direct feedback loops and direct positive correlation to those tumor markers going down. So that just kind of helps build the confidence that, yeah, this is a mechanism that's going on when the thyroid's not functioning well. Part of the reason that thyroid medication is so prolifically common is because the symptoms of depression, weight gain, hair loss, dry skin, all these things that nobody really wants, they're so easily improved, quote, when they take a thyroid medication. Makes it very common. Incidentally, hypothyroid, low thyroid is another trigger for high cholesterol. So there's another mechanism to end up with cholesterol medications as well. So that's kind of how and why potentially thyroid medications are so profoundly common. The thyroid gets compromised because it gets feedback from just about every gland or organ in the body. And so there could be a hormonal deficiency, and then the thyroid's going to upregulate to try to compensate for estrogen. Estrogen can inhibit the thyroid conversion. Mercury from fillings or toxic metals can inhibit the thyroid hormone from converting and activating to give us energy. So all these mechanisms in our life and in our body, any one of them can be the trigger, the reason that the thyroid is under functioning. The typical medical approach is like, hey, numbers are off, TSH is too high, your thyroid's working too hard, or your TSH is too low, we need to upregulate it. Here's a medication. Hey, your numbers are better. I'm not crying all the time anymore. Great. This victory. Count the cost ultimately, right?
Yeah, that's true. Now, thyroid headaches. I was going to remind you about that.
Yeah, well done. So the tension headaches in the back of the head are the third most common pattern of headaches. And what the mechanism there is, when the thyroid functions properly, it activates enzymes to keep our metabolism functioning properly, because thyroid is metabolism ultimately. It's kind of the gatekeeper to upregulate or downregulate metabolism based on what's going on in the body. We talked about all the feedback loops it has. And so when that's not functioning properly, we have a deficiency of enzymes, and that deficiency of enzymes causes the neck extensors, the muscles in the back of the neck, to not fire properly. So we end up kind of weak, and people will blame it on the auto accident they had 20 years ago and that sort of thing. But then we find that when we correct the thyroid, when we get it functioning properly, boom, those 20 years of neck pain that they've had ever since the accident goes away. So, just to kind of also make the point, people think it's because of the workout I've been doing, or because I picked up the grandkid, or the dog ran off. And ultimately, it's just the final mechanism that brought out a weakness that we already had. So kind of my whole niche is learn to listen to the body.
I love
ultimately.
That. Yes,
so
it will tell you things.
It's yelling at us. And most approaches, even in healthcare, is pressing what that's trying to tell us, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Create an excuse for it. I'm just getting old.
Right. I'm not going to get old.
I like that. And do you find that when you are supporting the liver, that the thyroid then starts functioning better too?
So there's a pathway in the liver called glucuronidation that is it's another one of those phase 2 detoxification pathways, kind of right alongside with methylation. That pathway is the main one to activate the thyroid hormones. It basically helps convert the inactive T thyroid, which is tyrosine with 4 iodines. So that's what the thyroid produces. And then the liver in that glucuronidation pathway activates that, or kind of liberates an iodine, makes it a T3, and that's where we get energy, and that's where we get our joy. When that's not functioning properly, we're prone to cry, and the thyroid numbers, TSH numbers, are going to go off because the thyroid's looking for that T3 to tell it, hey, everything's working good, we're firing, we're working properly. So when we're not converting properly, there's not enough T3, then the thyroid kind of upregulates to try to compensate. So that is a pathway in the liver. That's kind of one of the main correlations with that. And so in that, on labs, that would show as T4 okay and T3 low. That typically means that pathway is being blocked because of an estrogen problem, because of a toxin. That pathway also is one of the key pathways to break down estrogen, incidentally. So that's, again, kind of where the Dr. VP brain is going. What are all these mechanisms that are taking place, so that we can get to the least common denominator, which the location of head pain ultimately usually tells me what that primary area is.
Interesting. Do you find that you do a lot of extra modalities too with your clients, such as vitamin C IVs, hyperbaric zone? A lot of times they'll say different things.
Yeah, and a lot of my contemporaries do a lot more of that. Even labs, I used to do a lot more labs. My gig is, what's the sin? What's the dysfunction in your life that's causing you to ail ultimately? So, I mean, I try to whittle it down to this is what you're eating that's causing a problem, or this is what you need to eat more of to minimize the consequences of that problem, or this is the nutrient that you're deficient in, or this is the emotional trigger that happened. I mean, organs, unfortunately, can store emotions. You're going through, I mean, if we're in a season where loss, grief, sadness, yearning, those are emotions that will manifest in the lung or they'll manifest in the large intestine. So if we just lost a loved one and we're in that chronic season of grief, crying also is another emotion that's associated with the lung and large intestine. So, was it the chicken or the egg, right? Was it the emotional stress of losing mom or losing our loved one that caused the grief, that caused the lung to? My grandmother, unfortunately, had a grief season like that she ended up passing of lung cancer. So these things can happen. Was it the emotional trigger that set it up, or was it weakness in the lung that, everything's grief for them, right?
Wow. Yes. So some people that I was reading mentioned that iron and copper were not to be taken when dealing with anything like cancer. However, what are your thoughts on copper and iron when it comes to dealing with cancer?
Great. Yeah. So iron and copper are nutrients that also help that P450, the first phase of detoxification we were talking about. And the source of iron there is very important. If we're getting iron from kale, spinach, beets, beef, good food sources, that can help balance or equilibrate, if you will, that P450 pathway, which would be ideal if it's iron. And I went through this because I'm an aerobic athlete. I ride bikes a ton. I want oxygen moving through my blood. So I was using iron skillets as another form of getting my iron. Turns out that iron on an iron skillet is more of is a toxin. So that type
I was
of
about
iron,
to ask you that question. I was curious about that. I was like, what about iron skillets?
Right. Been there. I had to unfortunately throw out a whole cabinet of iron skillets because tell my wife, I want iron. We're going to cook everything in iron skillets. And this is how we take care of it and season it. And you do all of that. But then it turns out I learned and I tested the iron from them and realized that that form of iron is a toxin as opposed to the iron that's in beets and the kale and food. That's going to help us function better. So the source makes a huge difference when we're looking at, what you're talking about with triggers for cancer. It's certainly hemochromatosis, which means an overabundance of iron in the body. Heme is iron. Chromatosis means too much of it. When that's going on, that's a whole another cascade where there's typically toxins that's causing the body to hang on to that iron. So there's usually things like aluminum even potentially can compete for that. And yes, there needs to be a ratio, a balance between copper and iron and zinc. If a gal has a copper IUD, for example, we're going to want to support with more zinc to kind of offset or balance the copper that her body's absorbing on a regular basis. Zinc got a lot of press with COVID because zinc, well, one, our soils are for the most part deficient in zinc. Two, stress reduces zinc levels. Sugar leaches zinc. Toxic metals, we use up zinc trying to get rid of toxins in the body. So no wonder 99% of the people in the U.S. are zinc deficient, right? So then that's going to create a functional excess, if you will, of copper and things like that. Taking a zinc supplement, a good one, is a good place to start. Again, most of my patients, by the time they get there, are very zinc deficient.
Gotcha. Yes. What about a lot of people have them take melatonin at night, mainly breast cancer. I think they did studies on breast cancer and melatonin, but you mentioned that just taking B12 will help with the melatonin. And there's other things like going outside in the morning, getting some sun and getting that circadian rhythm through not looking at the sun, but getting from that light.
Well, actually, looking at the sun is actually good. Some neurologists would say, yeah.
Oh, they would? Man, just not on a solar eclipse, of course.
Right.
They'd be like, whatever you do, don't, and so what are your thoughts on when people are taking melatonin at night for cancer?
Yeah, so there's some value. And again, look at these things that melatonin, vitamin D that the body should be producing. We need to look at why is the body not producing them in the first place. I'm in Southern California. Nobody in Southern California should be vitamin D deficient ultimately. Right? I mean, when I first learned about this 40 years ago, I know I don't look that old. Thank you. No.
Not at all.
40 years ago, they were talking about just exposing our hands walking to the car was enough to generate enough vitamin D. And so when labs started coming out, or 15 years ago, or when they started testing vitamin D, it's like, why should my neighbors be low in vitamin D? And so there's typically toxins that compromise the production of vitamin D. And again, it comes back to that P450 pathway.
Right.
So as I started looking at that from that perspective, I'm like, why is somebody that's out in the sun regularly still D deficient? Turns out cadmium is a toxic metal that's in a lot of the pesticides on vegetables and things like that. Cadmium is a known inhibitor of P450 of vitamin D production. So if they're smoking that has cadmium and arsenic in it, for example, that's going to inhibit their ability to make vitamin D when they're in the sun. So again, we want to look at why, and we talked about the B12, right? So these are all things we want to look at. The body should be making B12. The body should be making melatonin. Why is that process not functioning properly when it's something that God has created us to produce and do? So yes, melatonin is a wonderful hormone. In fact, kind of a fun tidbit, if you will. In the presence of melatonin, the brain actually shrinks. And that's that's called the glymphatic system, which is a good thing because we've got a hard shell around it, right? And so in the presence of melatonin, the brain shrinks so that this glymphatic system can cleanse and heal and restore and rebuild the brain while we're sleeping. And so that's where melatonin could come and become very valuable to stimulate that process of recovery, rejuvenation while we're sleeping. But it doesn't always come without a cause. My first thing is, why are they getting benefit? Why are they deficient in melatonin? Something not. So cortisol, melatonin, that's our day-wake cycles, right? Melatonin gets stimulated with sundown, the orange-red hues. That's why we want to do blue blockers when we're looking at a computer in the evening and stuff. We don't want the blue light, the blue-green hues stimulate cortisol production. That's like, okay, sun's up, time to get up and conquer the day, slay the day. Then as the sun goes down, brain says, oh, time to produce melatonin. So that's where even colors can have an effect on what we're doing, how we feel, and recover or not.
So wear the blue light glasses at night.
The blue blockers, right?
The blue blockers. Yeah. Blue blockers, not blue light. Let me rephrase that. Wear the blue blocker.
Wear the blue light glasses in the morning.
Block blue. Yes. Oh, got you. Like when I was staying at my mom's this last week, real quick, I was like, oh, I got no sleep. Well, this lady had bought melatonin gummies, and I was just like, maybe I'll take a few melatonin gummies. Well, I took one. There were 10 milligrams each, but it tasted so good. I don't think they should make things in gummies. It tasted so good. I ate 70 of them. Okay, I got 7. Yes, I did. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was like, oh, what's happening to my stomach? I'm gonna throw up. So I Googled it. Like, can I kill myself with melatonin? And they're like, if you stop breathing. And I was like, no. So then I called poison control and I was like, I don't think I can breathe. I think I overdosed melatonin. And he goes, you can't overdose melatonin. And then all of a sudden I started breathing again. But my stomach was sick and I went and threw up. It really did hurt my stomach. Really not a great idea. They shouldn't make them in gummies. I usually don't do melatonin. I just am going to bed late because I've been in front of the computer. I just need to take a dose. I just need to take one. They tasted good. And then one turned into like eating half the package.
Tens of fairly strong melatonin as well. So that's a bit nuts.
Horrible. I know, it's horrible. Yeah. I'm glad I'm still alive. I woke up. I was pretty sure I killed myself. It was like 2 or 3 a.m. I was like, this is it.
Oops. Lesson learned.
Oh, man. But before we'll wrap it up, because I know I've kept you here quite a bit. What about, of course, you have free range. You could just keep talking. I will never stop recording. You just want to keep talking.
Thank you.
But what are 3 best things they can do to help prevent cancer?
So let's start with my Dr. V's tagline for cancer is organic is cheaper than chemo, ultimately. Pesticides are one of the primary causes, unfortunately, of cancer. So if we eat organic, that's going to limit our exposure to these toxins, to the pesticides that are the most common trigger for cancers. And vegetables are going to be filled with that folate, right? The antioxidants, things that are going to help balance the pathways. They're going to help rebuild, we didn't get into this too much, but rebuild the intestinal integrity so that can help prevent us from being inflamed and being full of toxins. Organic's cheaper than chemo. Step 1, eat organic to the best of your abilities. Minimize exposures to toxins. And we can talk about EMFs, electromagnetic. We didn't get in there. I'm supposed to be just concluding on what we talked about.
Oh, no, get into it. I don't care. Go for it. I love it.
So electromagnetic exposure, sleep with your cell phone on near your head because that's going to kind of fry the brain, if you will. Incidentally, toxic metals function like antennas. They make us more sensitive to those electromagnetic frequencies and things. So if we're getting the good minerals, that's going to help us be less sensitive to that electromagnetic poisoning, if you will. So that's another thing to do. And take a Sabbath day. I mean, you have a predominantly Christian audience, which means balance in life, right? Again, if God needed a day to rest, I certainly do too. And I'm pointing to myself because I'm guilty as all get out to not, I feel guilty trying to sit on the couch couch and take, my wife's like, no, man, sit your butt down there and stay,
We need relax. You're gonna relax.
Okay, just let me finish this post and this article, So yeah, I mean, I'm guilty as charged. I have trouble relaxing and letting my body do that recovery to regenerate, to make the melatonin, to detoxify and do all the things it needs to do to build me up better, faster, stronger, and keep the brain functioning optimally.
Now, I have one question. Are all minerals equal?
They all have different functions. So it kind of depends on what we're exposed to, what we need. If we are saturated, if we're getting a lot of good minerals, and probably want to take a good multi-mineral supplement, because a lot of our foods are deficient in those minerals. So, let me rephrase.
All mineral supplements. Are there some mineral supplements? Because I see some that are like in plastic containers, and I'm thinking, that's not a great idea.
Right.
So how do you know when you're getting a good mineral supplement that's not actually toxifying you worse, but going to help support you?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I mean, like calcium from oyster shells often isn't going to be great, or these very processed, chemically made minerals are going to often come out the way that it went in. Sorry to call somebody out, but 1-a-day vitamins. Somebody that worked at a sewer plant called 1-a-day and said, "Do you want all these vitamins back that we have at the sewer plant here?"
Oh no!
Yeah, because it still had a demarcation on there, with the red dye and the number that told them exactly what the vitamin was that they were seeing in the sewer system. Wow. So not getting a lot of benefit out of that. So yeah, I mean, a plant source, multi-mineral that is digest well, you probably want to chew it. In general, minerals come from rocks, right? Mm-hmm. That's why societies, civilizations that, at the base of the hills where water's coming down from the mountain, going over rocks and through good, healthy soils, that's going to be loaded with minerals. So those are good. There's a lot of good mineral options out there. There's a product called Shilajit.
Oh, I love them.
Fulvic and humic acid. Those are said to be able to morph into whatever mineral you may need. So if you were deficient in zinc and took the fulvic and humic acids, it could function as a zinc supplement for you. If I was deficient in iron, I could take this same product and help with my iron levels. So that's a kind of a buzz, kind of one of the latest and greatest, if you will, nutrients that can help with the minerals as well.
Are they chelators? Do you have good chelators that you recommend for a lot of the toxins we're exposed to nowadays?
Yeah, so one of my favorite zinc supplements is a chelated form of zinc to help it be more usable, more user-friendly. A lot of them, if they bind it to an aspartate or something along those lines, that's kind of a chemically made form of zinc, for example, that typically isn't going to be quite as bioavailable, as usable for us.
Gotcha.
Look at them as in nature. The second most common, and that chelated form of zinc is the strongest zinc I have for people that are very deficient. The next most common is one that's a complex, and that has some of the copper, some of the other minerals in it that would be more as it would be in rocks, if we were to eat rocks or in foods, because these don't function in unison. Minerals don't function alone, or they're not found in nature alone. So we want to eat them more as we would get them in food to support all the various systems so that we don't create, I mentioned copper excess would cause heavy menstruation for a gal, for example. So we balance that out with the zinc. If we were taking a supplement and I've done it to myself because I'm in this industry, I'm always experimenting. I'm a lab. I've many times OD'd and taken too much of a mineral or a supplement that ends up creating problems and imbalances later on. Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'm a lab too. I feel like, oops, you don't do that.
Because we're others-centered, right? We experiment on ourselves so that others can benefit.
Right. If you do, don't take 70 milligrams melatonin. Mm-hmm. I just want to thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this and showing up a second time to share your knowledge and your gift that God's given you with all of us. It's such a blessing. How can people learn more from you? And if a doctor wants to be part of those classes and seminars, what's your best way for them to contact you?
Great. Thank you. Fortunately, my last name is pretty unique. V as in Victor, Rzal. Put that into your favorite search medium, and, Vrzal technique will take the doctors to those teaching training videos on YouTube. I have some stuff. I haven't put the energy quite yet into getting a whole lot of it. And I've got many podcasts that will soon be uploaded to YouTube. Try to post fairly regular health pearl on Instagram and Facebook and that sort of stuff as well. So as best as I can in my hectic, crazy days. I'm busy in practice trying to save the world one person at a time, mostly right now.
So blessed. And don't forget, guys, if you don't have the book, The Headache Advantage, you've got to get it. Take advantage of getting this great book. There's so much information in there. So thank you again. Yeah. Well, I love it. Thank you. I don't even know what to say. It's just, it's a blessing that you've been here and that you took time out to speak to us.
thank you for the opportunity to share. And I sure appreciate what you're doing and helping inspire others to greatness.
Greatness. Superman, Superwoman, woman. Love it.
Thank you. Let's keep it up.
Thank you for listening to My Health Renewed podcast. I do wish we could solve all the world's problems in one podcast, but that would probably be like the longest podcast known to mankind. Or maybe be short and simple. Maybe just be like, hey, look, Jesus is the answer for your problems today. Problem solved. So, I don't know. But anyways, I was so grateful to have Dr. Vrzal on here because you can tell that God is also doing amazing work through him. And if you listen to this podcast and would like to connect with him, you can visit his website at drvrzal.com. That's drvrzal.com. Also, if you would like to take a step further and join a community where we encourage each other, we support each other and grow together, where we learn more together, taking small steps that are creating big, lasting changes, then I want to invite you to check out My Health Renewed community. You can go to myhealthrenewed.com, check out our community. You can also set up a free discovery call with me, Coach Kristi, or one of our coaches. And we'd love to hear your story and then find out if My Health Renewed community would be a good fit for you. So thank you once again for listening to My Health Renewed podcast. Share this with your friends and family and have a great day.